The child goes to the teacher who will guide that child. What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot. Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, it's great to have all of you back for this course in Values and Spirituality. If you are joining us for the first time, I highly recommend that you watch this entire series from episode 1 in a chronological fashion, as we are going through a series of 8 books written by the author, Sister Denise Lawrence of Brahma Kumaris. We are currently at page 102 of book number 1, where we will be discussing the subject of cultivating universal values. Welcome, Sister Denise.
Thank you.
I'm sure the viewers now consider you to be a happily familiar face. Sister Denise, I remembered when we took up the subject of universal values, you said that you would no longer use this term, you would use the term spiritual values. So is it safe for us to call this discussion cultivating spiritual values, or do you want to leave it the same?
Actually, now that we've been talking about it and we understand our terms of reference and our use of terminologies, I think we've seen that there's a synonym, universal and spiritual. But in other ways, I do prefer spiritual because it really comes from the core of the human spirit.
I'd like to start with the beginning of the first paragraph, which reads as follows. We have considered the question, what kind of value should be taught and why, grappling with real ethical dilemmas through the use of specially designed exercises is an important aspect of any education in human values curriculum because it develops reasoning and realization. What struck me about what you just said is that it would take a very good teacher to come up with exercises that can help the student, the adult student, really get his feet into it and come up with an answer that's realistic and practical.
You know, one of the very important things that is part of this course, this education in values and spirituality, is a policy that I have of not using hypothetical examples.
Yeah.
That means we're looking at real situations. So in any matter of developing specially designed exercises, the first thing you have to do is say to your people, okay, is there anyone who has personal experience of an incident of this nature, that what they're talking about? And you select that incident. You may role play it, or you may get people to talk about other real incidents that are similar. Because as long as you're talking about hypothetical examples, you're in the realm of imagination, and there you are free to use your prejudices and preconceptions. And the reality of actual incidents makes people aware that there are many, many attenuating and extenuating circumstances and attributes of the situation that are far more than anybody could just dream up in their imagination. Then you get people to just look at that. You may have had an incident between people who are participating in the course when it's taught in a group. Anytime something comes up or somebody expresses a prejudice or something, a good teacher will stop the proceedings and say, okay, here's a real incident. Everybody saw it. Let's just stop. Let's take this incident. Let's analyze it. And because it just happened, everyone can remember it. And it's a bit difficult to lie about it because it's right in front of you and everybody saw it. What very often happens when there is an incident, you have people in position of power, people in position of weakness, people who are observers who are trained to say nothing and do nothing. And you need to grab a hold of that. But the problem is there's so much training in the conventional social attitudes that you should let it go, forget it, not talk about it, or talk about it behind closed doors or whatever, that it never really gets addressed. Because reality is you do get people in position of power who display hypocrisy, violence, abuse of power. You get others who enable that, who say, oh no, you don't upset the elder, because if you challenge them they'll get upset and that would be bad, you know, but it's not as bad as what they need to be challenged about, you see. So this is where special exercises of actually working with real situations is so helpful, because it creates a culture of reality, of dealing with things that really happened, actual historical events. And then you can also look at different people's feelings about it. And there you will see, as the different participants give their response to it, you will see the extent to which they are under the influence of these archaic social attitudes. And when you see something like that, you can again stop the proceedings and say, okay, here's an example of someone who is allowing something to be happening which is against their conscience because of loyalty to archaic social attitudes. So let's stop here and let's examine it. And in this kind of situation, the people will be looking at it in a safe environment where they won't be punished, and so they'll be much freer to express what they really think about it. You'd be surprised how many people will begin their sentences with, I'm not allowed to say what I just saw. And then the teacher will say, but here you are allowed, and everybody else is aware, so it's okay, you can say. So for the first time in their life, they go against a proscripture which says you are not allowed to tell the truth because that's dishonest. You see, it's such confusion happens. And then you are allowed to tell the truth, and maybe you have a lot of emotions around it. But when it's being examined like this, analyzed, the emotion that you feel initially by the situation starts to become calm as you examine it dispassionately. And this also gives the person whose emotions were aroused by the situation the opportunity to be cool and dispassionate, and to say what they really think without the upheaval of an emotion getting in the way, you see. And what this does is it gives the participants an experience that they never would have had before of how to deal with real situations. And this then goes into memory, and they have a sanskar of being able to do something which previously there was no sanskar for that, there was no experience of that. And this creates a very real shift, and you see the word realization. Realization means that you can understand something that you didn't understand before, because the way it's being examined is, in a sense, you can say clinical. And all of this makes a big difference. I had many experiences of getting people into circles and looking at a particular event, and everybody, learning how to look at it and speak what they feel and what they think. And when you have people in an educational setup in a circle, it's not a hierarchical setup where whatever the teacher says is what's right, and the students have to just listen and then write it down. You're really asking the people, the students, not to be students, but to be just people. You bring everybody onto an equal playing field and you say, okay, here's the situation. It's a real situation. Now what do you have to say about it? And the people who speak, they also listen to the others. And you have rules of no interruptions. You have rules of you can speak for a fixed amount of time, not more. So you don't have a situation where somebody hogs the conversation. You make sure that everybody speaks, because you get situations where a lot of people's reaction to a stressful situation is that they will just shut down and be quiet. So in an exercise like this, you see the ones who are shy, the ones who feel they're not allowed to speak. Everyone's attention moves towards that person, and that person is asked in a very gentle way, a very safe way, what do you feel, what do you think? And everyone is bound to listen to them. Sometimes in a situation like that, it triggers a memory of something that really happened to that person where they shut down as a result of that traumatic incident. And here you're giving them an opportunity to relive it, but instead of being shut down, they're being encouraged to express their feelings. It's allowed, whatever wasn't allowed, the person is heard. They can sort of move through the mountain of their emotion and come to a calm place with everybody responding to them that yes, what you experienced, what you went through is real, and we're with you. Things like this, experiences like this, educational arrangements like this really change the situation for individuals who know only the dysfunctional setup. So then they've got a contrast between what it's like being in a dysfunctional setup and what it's like being in a functional setup. So they begin to feel that the problem is not the incident but the setup in which it takes place.
That is quite a paradigm shift, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah. And when you have maybe a weekly discussion with people, okay, they're studying, they're writing, they're thinking about it individually, then you come together with the other students and you look at real situations. They're learning skills for working through situations that normally the setup doesn't permit any working through. When you don't work through a traumatic situation, it leaves a scar on the soul and puts you in survival. When you do work through a traumatic incident, it's very therapeutic and allows the person to be able to heal as opposed to not heal, or to heal more quickly as opposed to having it take a very, very long time to work through. And then that person will not be forced to pass that on to the next generation because they will have worked through it.
You begin paragraph number 2 on the following note. A rigid system of absolute values is created when a society tries to influence the behavior of young people rather than teach them the underlying process of moral reasoning. So such a society does not recognize that our lives are filled with ethical dilemmas. So the message that I got from what you're saying is that instead of taking what the student has and bringing the best out, society tries to put something in. And you're saying that this needs to be addressed.
It does need to be addressed because what society puts in is its prejudices, preconceptions, and a lot of its vices.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole situation gets worse in the name of making it better.
Mm-hmm.
I think let's take an example of bullying.
Yeah,
because
which
it's
is
a very big problem.
Yeah.
You have a group of students, invariably, sooner or later, an incident of bullying will occur. Everybody sees that, including the teacher. You say, okay, let's take this situation. You can role play it. Take the person who's the bully and say, okay, I want you to watch this role play. Somebody is playing you, somebody is playing the person you bullied. Let's just look at what actually happened here, and let's look at the emotions that are going on. Because the person who is doing the bullying is now in a position of being a detached observer. Detached or attached, but at least an observer. And that person will see things that they are unable to see in the midst of the activity of bullying. And why will a person engage in bullying? There has to be something in their family environment which promotes it and provokes it, or something deep in their personal sanskaras, you see, which creates that. And what we're trying to do with these kinds of exercises is get that person in touch with the trauma or the poison that triggers the activity of bullying in that person so that they can feel their pain. In spiritual practice, we have a concept that's very subtle, and it's one of the powers. In Hindi, we call it Mahsustaki Shakti, the power to feel. Somebody who engages in violence, there is a feeling that will promote to perform an act of violence. You need to get that person to feel that feeling independently of a circumstance where they can do violence. When a person feels that feeling and has to deal with that feeling in a way other than just perform an act of violence, it sort of destabilizes the person and makes the person much more aware of what lies behind that aroused feeling. And very often it will be that that person has been severely abused, and the way that they react to that is to be abusive to others. Now, if a person can get in touch with their pain, which has caused them to react with violence, instead of having an experience of reactive violence, they will actually stay in their pain. Mm. And when a person is in their pain, what do they need? They need love, they need care, they need to be heard, they need compassion. And all of this will act in quite a healing way to help a person to realize that the problem is not that everybody else is bad and needs to be beaten up, but the problem is that I have been identified as bad, and poisoned by that, and I need to know and feel and get that I'm just doing to others what was done to me, and that is optional. Then you start to sensitize that person to some of the other options. Because you see, the thing is, if a person is violent, it means that they have a high value on being tough. But behind that toughness, there's hurt. Now, if a person responds to being hurt by expressing their pain, that looks weak. And that's worse than being tough and violating somebody else, you see. Which means that their value system has been artificially set up through abuse, and you are bringing a person in touch with their feelings so that other people, when they see and interact with somebody who behaves aggressively, they get in touch with the hurt of that person, and instead of feeling hatred or hostility or fear of that person, they start to feel compassion, and it shifts the whole alignment in the social setup between that bully and the people who are, harmed by that behavior, you see. And that is something that can be done in an educational environment, but of course you can understand that the teacher as facilitator needs to be pretty clued up about how to do this. And unfortunately, very few teachers are that well trained.
Okay, so there you go. Cultivating universal or spiritual values. Sister Denise has taken us into great detail on the subject of moral discussion. If this is not something that you have considered before, I would invite you to do the same. It is very interesting to see how negative or antisocial behavior is addressed in a manner that is actually quite compassionate towards the perpetrator as well as the victim. And this is highly unusual because I've never seen this done in society, and this is a spiritual way of looking at things, and I think the aim is to heal both the perpetrator as well as the victim, and both individuals become better as a result of participating in such mutually beneficial exercises. A highly unusual approach by Sister Denise. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I would invite you, whether you're an educator or a parent or any interested adult in society who's wanting to take things deeper to a more spiritual level, not just for yourself but for your community, to consider what Sister Denise is saying and ask yourself whether this is something that you can apply in your life personally and in your community. So thank you, Sister Denise, for a wonderful half an hour. And thank you, viewer, for joining us. Take care and goodbye.